Hi, my name is Renee Bradford, and today I'm going to discuss Ann Koett's article, The Myth of the Vaginal Orgasm, which appears on pages 147 to 152 of the first edition of the textbook and pages 130 to 135 of the second edition. In this piece, Koedt responds to the fact that people with vaginas are taught that their vaginas should have orgasms, and educates her audience about how the clitoris is the actual location designed to orgasm. Because it was written in 1970, there are incorrect assumptions and generalizations made about sexuality and gender identity, and there have been shifts in how society perceives women's sexuality since. To begin today, I'd like to summarize Koett's explanation of the biology behind the clitoral orgasm. The clitoris has erectile tissue and has a surface covering composed of special nerve endings called genital corpuscles, which lead to orgasm with stimulation and an appropriate mentality. No other area has these corpuscles. Koedt explains this biology with the help of G. Lombard Kelly's Sexual Feeling in Married Men and Women. She also references less credible sources, including Sigmund Freud, who writes that adolescents have clitoral orgasms and adults have vaginal orgasms, Frank S. Caprio, who writes that people with vaginas who can't experience vaginal orgasms are frigid and need psychological help, and Marie Bonaparte, who writes that people with vaginas who can't experience vaginal orgasms should surgically lower their clitoris. I'm definitely thankful that we have access to accurate explanations of the vagina's anatomy, even if general education continues to promote ignorance. With a basic understanding of the biology behind clitoral orgasms, it is easier to understand what Koedt is talking about in her article and why it is relevant. So let's get into exactly why this topic is relevant. On pages 147 and 148 of the first edition, Koedt writes, "Women have thus been defined sexually in terms of what pleases men. Our own biology has not been properly analyzed. Instead, we are fed the myth of the liberated woman and her vaginal orgasm, an orgasm which in fact does not exist. What we must do is redefine our sexuality. We must discard normal concepts of sex and create new guidelines which take into account mutual sexual enjoyment." This quote is a perfect description of how sex is taught in a way that excludes half the population from pleasure. So we must rethink sex so that people with vaginas can orgasm. With the knowledge that we have, this should not be an issue. There are a multitude of reasons why the myth of the vaginal orgasm continues to live on. For men, it is easy to at least pretend to believe in vaginal orgasms. Koedt accurately explains that men cannot think of women outside of women's relations to them, so it does not matter for them. Also, acknowledging clitoral orgasms would make men expendable, decrease their control over women, and provide evidence against homophobic ideologies. Women also play a role in letting the myth of the vaginal orgasm live on. Women have been known to claim they've had vaginal orgasms or fake vaginal orgasm because they do not understand the anatomy or because they are trying to fit into our patriarchal society. The fact that we live in a patriarchal society is inherently a reason that people remain ignorant to the clitoral orgasm because it automatically demotes women's issues. Being generally dissatisfied sexually is no exception. I'd like to reference another quote that will help explain how relevant this topic is. Koett's quote on page 150 of the first edition reads, "So in addition to being sexually deprived, these women were told to blame themselves when they deserved no blame. Looking for a cure to a problem that has none can lead a woman on an endless path of self-hatred and insecurity." This is significant to note because it shows how harmful ignorance can be, especially when educators and doctors use their credibility to spread incorrect ideas about health. This is an insightful explanation of how terms like frigidity can be harmful and why it is important to make it obvious that the myth of the vaginal orgasm is nothing more than a myth. The discussion questions I have for the class will hopefully help to put Koedt's writing into our current context and elaborate on how fundamental and severe the problem is. So here is what I would like to know. Since this was written in 1970, how has ignorance about orgasms changed? How has this changed its societal effect, and what can we do to minimize its consequences? Additionally, how has this concept of normalcy become so deep-rooted into our society when it is illogical for half the population? By this I mean, why is penetrative sex considered the norm when it is not effective for many people? Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope that it helped you to understand Anne Koett's The Myth of the Vaginal Orgasm.